All right, today we're going to tackle a really big stereotype, one you've probably heard a million times. The idea of the politically apathetic, social media-obsessed millennial. But is there any truth to it? We're going to dive into the data and see what's really going on.
You know the one, right? We've all heard some version of this. It's this common criticism that paints an entire generation as just totally checked out from civic life. Too busy Instagramming and tweeting to care about the world around them.
But what does the data actually say? Well, to get past all those assumptions, we're looking at a big survey of over 1,000 young adults. This comes from the University of Texas at Austin, and it really digs into how they're actually using these platforms.
So let's start with a fact that probably won't surprise anyone. 95% of millennials use social media, and a whopping 86% are on it daily. I mean, this always-on connectivity is basically universal at this point. But here's the thing. The real question isn't that they're online. It's what they're doing there. And as you're about to see, it is way more complicated than those critics would have you believe.
Okay, let's get into it. First up, social media's new roles. It's definitely not just for scrolling anymore.
So the first myth that really needs to be busted is this idea that social media is only for socializing. Look, staying in touch with friends and family, that's still a huge deal, of course. But these platforms have really evolved. They've become these incredibly powerful tools for something else entirely.
And you can really see that evolution right here. Take a look at this chart. For sure, 82% say social media is important for staying in touch with friends. No surprise there. But look how close that second bar is. A full 65%, that's nearly 2/3 of them, say it's also important for getting news about what's going on in the world. That is a massive shift.
And it actually goes even deeper than that. For almost a third of millennials, 31% to be exact, social media isn't just a place to get news, it's their main source of news. Think about that. That's more than double the next closest source, which would be like, going directly to a news website. This is a total game changer for how information gets to people.
All right, next section, redefining political action. So, is it all just clicktivism? You hear that term thrown around a lot, right? This idea that online political action is lazy or doesn't mean anything. Let's see if the data agrees. Well, the data really seems to push back on that idea. I mean, look at this. More than half of millennials, 54%, have signed an online petition. And yeah, it might seem like a simple click, but it's a real political action. And for this generation, it's becoming a pretty standard part of how they participate.
And this is so important to understand. The study found that online action isn't a replacement for offline action. It's more like a gateway. It's where people get informed, where they connect with others who care about the same issues, and that online spark often leads directly to real-world actions. The two really go hand in hand.
And here's the real kicker. The data shows that the people who are posting political content online, they're way more likely to also be the ones attending rallies, going to meetings, and, actually voting. So that whole stereotype of the slacktivist who just clicks and does nothing else, it just doesn't hold up. The online and offline worlds are totally connected.
But, and this is a big but, all this engagement comes with a pretty serious downside. There's this frustration paradox. People are engaged, but they're also getting exhausted by it. And it really has to do with the emotional toll of being constantly surrounded by political talk online.
Just look at this chart. It's pretty telling. When you ask millennials how political content on social media makes them feel, wow, a massive 72% say frustrated. Only about a quarter say it makes them feel motivated. So yeah, they're plugging in, but a lot of the time, the experience is just plain draining.
So, okay, where is all that frustration coming from? Well, this comparison gives us a big clue. When you stack up social media against traditional media like TV or newspapers, things get interesting. About half of millennials say the conversations on social media are less respectful and less trustworthy. It seems like the toxic tone of a lot of online debate is really taking a toll.
Okay, now we need to get a little more nuanced here, because you can't just talk about millennials as if they're all one big group having the same experience. It turns out it's just not a monolith. In fact, one of the most consistent and honestly most striking findings in the whole report is this dramatic difference in how people respond to political content, and it's based on race. Remember how we just saw that most millennials feel frustrated by political content? Well, let's break that down. The difference here is just stark. For white millennials, only 16% say they feel motivated. But for black millennials, that number shoots up to 44%. That's almost 3 times higher, a completely different experience.
And that motivation seems to be tied directly to a sense of empowerment.
Black millennials are much more likely to believe that social media actually gives them a voice, that it gives them real influence on what's happening. We're talking 42% compared to just 25% of their white peers.
So, let's pull all of this together. We're looking at a completely new civic landscape. It's been a fundamental shift. So what does this all mean for the future of getting involved in our communities and our politics?
Well, the report's conclusion is pretty clear on this. Rather than killing off civic engagement, social media is completely remaking it. It's not that people are doing less, it's that they're doing it differently. The old ways are giving way to new ones.
So really, the question we should be asking is no longer if millennials are engaged. The data shows they clearly are. The real question is how. And we're seeing this fascinating shift away from what the report calls legacy expressions, like writing a letter to the editor, towards these new emergent forms of participation, like organizing a movement online.
And that's really the big takeaway here. The public square is now digital. It's messy, it's complicated, and for a lot of people, it's frustrating. But it's also where civic life is happening. And that leaves us all with a really big question to think about. What kind of conversations are we going to build there?